Well, thank you very much, Randhir, and the rest of the Products Account team and eBay for hosting us. It's great to be here. These talks are always interesting in that do you do kind of frameworks and best practices and ways to apply some of this stuff to your work? Is it best to lead through examples? So I thought I tried to go with the latter. So really trying to walk you guys through what we learned as we were helping to build the ads business on Instagram, some of the learnings that came along with that, some of the things that we can maybe take away, but then also how we're thinking about the future, how we think about building products specifically to connect people and businesses and where we might go in the future. I'd love to take questions at the end. We'll try to get through the content. Again, as I mentioned, I think the three things I want to you guys take away from here is how we think about building products to Instagram, and I think even from how we're organized in terms of organized around the mission and around our service to our customers as opposed to by functional areas, which I think is an interesting kind of difference, as well as some of the ways we built products and all the way we're thinking about building products in the future. And I think the context is important here just to understand the scale that we're operating at. Hopefully you guys are familiar with a bunch of this information, but we recently announced we're 1 billion people on Instagram that use the platform every month, which is an insane kind of growth rate. I joined the company about 3.5 years ago, and we had just crossed 250 million. So to see that amount of growth in a little bit less than 3 years has been staggering. And I think the thing that's not really well understood is how international we are. So 80% of our audience, which actually makes sense if you think about it from a numbers perspective, is outside the US. So it very much reflects kind of the humanity on the platform, and even the business community, of which there are 25 million businesses active every month on Instagram, are also largely outside the US, which is a very interesting kind of dynamic with the ecosystem. It's been about 2 years that we launched Instagram Stories, and that's taken off really quickly. I'll talk a little bit about that in terms of how we got there and why we built Stories. But we have 400 million that are using that every single day. And of the 25 million businesses that I mentioned, 2 million are active advertisers. And that stat is really important because it's not about the number of advertisers meaning that we generate more revenue or that means that we can show more ads. It actually means the ads are better. So the more advertisers we have in our system, the more ads we can choose from, and therefore the better job we can do of showing you the most relevant ad, which I think is a dynamic that's not really well understood when you talk about scale of an advertising product. I'm going to actually take questions at the very end if you don't mind. That's what they asked me to do, but hang on to that. Okay, so how are we organized? This is our mission. Our mission is to bring people closer to the people and things that they love. So I actually have two main product teams. One whose job is to bring people closer to the people they care about. And my team is responsible for bringing people closer to the things that they love. So things could be businesses, could be creators, could be celebrities, could be your local coffee shop. But the types of products we build, the experiences, the job we're solving for people when they look to interact with things is different than the one that they do when they interact with people. But it's important that the platform really support these two equally. And that's how we think about organizing the team. So my organization works on all of our ad products across feed, across stories. We think about businesses organically across the ways people in businesses interact. We also think about search and explore and all the ways that people discover businesses and interests. And then we have vertical teams that think about experiences end to end. So one of them we announced more recently is around media and IGTV. So happy to take some questions on that if there are some at the end, but also around shopping and e-com and how we're thinking about the way people shop on Instagram. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I'm actually going to start the talk about building ads. And we'll move the mouse out of the way here. If you think about the history of Instagram advertising, we launched our very first ad in 2013. This was the actual first ad that ever ran on Instagram. It's from Michael Kors. And it was pretty much as manual as you could possibly expect. It was a kind of sales team that was direct with the client. It was getting the assets over by hand. The time on the clock is literally the time the ad went out in the feed. Like that's how coordinated this all was. And it was very manual. And that's actually explicit. The goal when we launched the product was really to understand what ads would do for the Instagram community. Like how would people react? How would they feel? And by bringing the things in slowly and being able to control every aspect of it, we really got a sense of what the community was looking for. And it was very manual. This was literally how we booked which campaigns ran on which day. That's a whiteboard. So it seems kind of counterintuitive, right? Why would we, at the scale that we're operating at, build an ad product that had a back end that was a whiteboard? It's because that wasn't the thing to go and solve. The thing to go and solve when we launched the product was how would the community respond to advertising? And that's what we cared about. And we cared about the quality of the creative, the quality of the asset. And now there's a rumor circulating that Kevin Systrom, who's our co-founder and CEO, personally reviewed every ad creative that came onto the platform. I'm here to tell you that rumor is absolutely true. Now, it doesn't do that anymore. It's kind of hard with 2 million advertisers. But again, important early on to set the right norms of what we were looking for on the platform, what we were thinking about. There was literally a process by which assets would come in, get traffic into the system, show up in Kevin's inbox, and he would take a look. And the things that he would provide feedback on were things that were important for us at the time as a platform. The quality bar, the things that we cared a lot about, which has kind of two kinds of impacts. One, it helped establish that quality bar early. It allowed us to actually build scalable systems to apply some of the things that we were looking for at scale. But it required some of that manual work to get there. But the other thing is that quality is very subjective. And while some of the early assets were beautifully shot, like this was a McDonald's ad that at first glance doesn't look like a fast food creative ad, it's beautifully shot, but it isn't necessarily relevant to everyone we showed it to. And totally makes sense if you think about ad products at scale, is that relevance drives performance and the ability to scale more than anything else. And so the idea was we can get manual to a certain extent. We can sell IOs, we can ramp the product slowly, but when you want to scale, you've got to bring relevance to the table. And that's one of the things we learned here, certainly with the McDonald's ad and some of the press we saw, but really about thinking about, okay, given what we've learned, what the community was looking for, what the expectations and the norms were, how do we apply that at more scale? So the first thing we needed to do was think through, okay, well, Instagram, and for any of you that have been on the platform early days, 2010, 2011, one of the sort of icons of content on the platform was that everything was square. All the media was square, everything you uploaded to the platform was square, and there were some tricks underneath the covers to kind of make it feel really fast. One of the things that Mike and Kevin worked on early was when you were going through the upload flow and you were looking at your media and you were typing in your caption, it was actually already uploading the asset behind the scenes so that when you hit post, it was instantaneously on the platform. Because the idea was you were already doing, like, your editing was already finished, now you're working on your copy, so you're probably not going to touch the asset anymore, so we were okay kind of uploading. So some of these early decisions around performance and simplicity kind of carried over, and the square was one of those things. It was a sacred cow. And if you think about it from an advertising perspective, and we'll go into this, sort of what we're dealing with now with stories, but not a lot of ads were being generated in the square format. So we asked ourselves, okay, if we wanted to scale the ad product, but we had a pretty big limitation in format from a square perspective, how do we actually apply that at scale? So we actually looked at this. We looked at what was, oh man, this scaling is tough. This is probably worth fixing, actually, because you can't see any of my titles, which just sucks. No? It's all right. Just take a little break.
The bars are okay, then I guess, and you have your custom thing in the file setup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why don't I didn't save your changes. Let's do that.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Revisit sacred cows. Okay, so square. Now, if we wanted to be able to bring non-square media in from an advertising perspective, let's say we did that. We allowed non-square media to exist for ads, but we didn't allow that for anything but ads. What would happen? You basically develop really easy ad blindness as a consumer. You knew that as soon as you came across something that was non-square, that was an ad you're going to scroll right by. So what we looked at was, okay, what are people doing on the platform? This is a lot of how we think about building product is what are people doing on the platform? How are they hacking what we're doing on the system? And how are we not really helping them or actually just getting in their way? So 20% of media, this was back in 2014, 20% of media uploaded to Instagram was actually being letterboxed in some way. So people were trying to get landscape creative, they were trying to get portrait creative into Instagram, and we were just getting in their way because we were so fixed on the square. So this was a really important lesson for all of us, for Kevin, for Mike, for the rest of the team, in that some of the things that maybe you hold really near and dear and like what you think is iconic about the platform maybe isn't actually all that iconic. And actually, how much more beneficial is it to the community to be able to represent their media in the way they would love to show it, where something that is tall actually looks tall and something that's wide actually looks wide. So that was a really early lesson, and maybe some of the things that we think are really important aren't. But we should not just do that based on our own assessment. We should look at how people are using the platform and then figure out how we want to adjust. So this was a really important thing. Now, a couple other things to keep in mind. When you look at all of the Instagram media in feed, there's a pretty consistent look and feel across all the media you come across. There's actually not that many formats that you can come across in your feed, and that's also very deliberate. It's deliberate because one of the values we have is keeping things very simple. And so one of the trade-offs that we make is we might do what is suboptimal for any individual product, but we want to make sure that it's got a consistent design system with the rest of Instagram so that it isn't introducing complexity in one place that you then have to think about somewhere else. So maybe for ads, it would have been more beneficial to kind of bring in a really big, bright, click banner, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But it would have been inconsistent with a lot of the organic things that you'd come across in your feed. So keeping these things really consistent was important. There's other few things that are important where on Instagram, the caption is below the media. And a lot of social platforms, the caption is above the media. So the point of view there is that the caption matters as much as the media. In our case, it's the other way around. The media matters the most. And it's why we lead with the media, we lead with the author, and that's how all feed posts are actually created. And if you think about it, your caption is completely optional. It's really about the media. The greatest sort of anecdote on this one is, this is very much a kind of a humble brag, but when we onboarded the Pope a couple of years ago onto Instagram, and Kevin flew out to Vatican City and actually onboarded the Pope directly onto the platform, one of the things he said that really stuck with me is, he uses a bunch of other social platforms, and he had to translate the things he wanted to say into so many different languages because that's how he would communicate. And he started to realize that when people would come and visit him, especially younger people who didn't necessarily speak his language, they would just pull out their phone and show him pictures. And that's how they were communicating. That's how they were expressing to him what it meant to meet him. And so it really clicked for him that sort of visual communication is such a universal language. And we've kept that philosophy, whether it's with feed or in stories, that leading with the visual and letting the visual kind of tell the story is the most important thing. And that continues to be a really important philosophy for us. So revisiting some of the sacred cows, non-square was a big one, and we wanted to do that in a really kind of natural way. But then you also have to think about it from an advertiser perspective. These first ads, imagine these were ads here. These were just images. So great for maybe brand or awareness, not so great if you're trying to drive a result. And if you think about this in 2015, which is when we were ramping the business, so much of sort of advertising dollars were around driving some outcome, whether that was getting people to your site, getting them to install your app, getting them to convert. And without links, there was no way to do that really easily. And now the thing that we still have today is there are no organic links on feed on Instagram. And that's very deliberate. Because if there are links on the platform, especially in feed, the incentives around why people post content change. It's not about communicating with just that visual message, it's about getting people somewhere else. And so we've kept that consistent even today, and that's why we don't allow reshares easily on feed. Because we believe the content that shows up in feed is about the author and not about someone else. And so these types of things I think are still pretty consistent with how we think about kind of building for ad products, which is, okay, well, if we didn't have links in feed, then we obviously needed links in ad products to support links and conversions and all the things I mentioned. But how to do that well. So we actually took a bunch of lessons from Facebook and said, well, okay, how does a Facebook ad product work in feed? And there you've got the media, you've got the call to action button, in this case says shop now. Let's make both of those tappable so that when people click on this, they can go to the website. So what did we see once we launched this? We launched this in late 2015, and the data looked pretty good. Like click-through rate was high, it seemed like we were delivering a bunch of value. And then we started looking at the data. And what we saw was over 80% of sessions in that in-app browser were exiting within 2 seconds. So we were driving a bunch of clicks, but were they actually valuable to the brand who was paying for them? The answer is no. It's because people were accidentally tapping the media when they were looking to like, or when they were looking just to scroll, but they fat-fingered it and they tapped on the media. So you've now, one of our principles is keeping things really native. We've suddenly fundamentally changed the way the feed media works, and that's actually pretty disturbing from a user perspective. So we actually very quickly, within a couple of weeks, rolled out this overlay, which is a little bit hard to see, but basically when you tap the media, it then asks you again to confirm that you want to go off to the website. And the tap-through target there is in the middle of the media very explicitly, not sort of on the side where you tapped it originally. So what did this do? This tanked a bunch of the click-through rate metrics. Makes sense. We roadblocked people before they went to the site. But it was the right thing to do from a long-term business perspective. Because A, we were delivering better value to advertisers because those clicks were probably going to resolve in, this was at the time when we weren't measuring conversion yet, just clicks. Probably more valuable traffic to the advertiser, but also it wasn't misleading for people. So another one of the really interesting, I think, lessons here is If you always put the community first, if you always put people first, you might be making short-term trade-offs, but actually you're building a better long-term business. And we had the luxury of doing that, and so we did. But that doesn't mean you stop there. You have to continue iterating. So if you think about the ad format that I just showed you, so you have the media, you have the call to action button. So we still saw, like, okay, now that we cut a bunch of this bad traffic to advertisers' websites, how do we get some of those clicks back? We started to understand a little bit more about how people were looking at the CTA. And we ran some eye tracking studies. And each of the colored circles here is an individual participant. And what you see is most of the tracking was on the left side of feed, which intuitively actually makes a ton of sense. It's where the handle is, it's where the caption begins, it's where all the engagement stats are located. But if you think about that from an advertising perspective, now you've got all your sort of attention to the left of the media, but you've got your call to action on the right side of the media. It doesn't really work. And so we iterated. So we said, okay, how do we make the call to action wider? Now there's a trade-off here. If you notice, by bringing the call to action down below the UFI or the feedback space, you've increased the height of the ad. And by increasing the height of the ad, you're essentially taking up more vertical space, which means as people are scrolling through feed, each piece of media is a little bit taller. So again, trade-offs. Like, you always have to make these trade-offs. But this one, to us, was worthwhile because we're able to drive and show people that there was actually something they could do kind of beyond the media itself. But it's important to continue iterating. One thing, if you notice here, this learn more actually doesn't really feel like part of the ad. It feels like an afterthought. It's kind of put below. And so we wanted to make the CTA, the call to action button, feel more integrated. So we wanted to integrate it into the media and sort of touching the media, and we started to bring in more context. If you as a user understood where that was going to take you and some more context about the destination, was that giving you more confidence in actually clicking? Should we even be able to highlight that as if you float on top of or hover on top of the media, kind of making it more obvious to you if you showed some intent that there's a place to go? And actually, this is where we've landed today, which is it still highlights, but the highlight is contextually colored based on the media itself. And so one difference, maybe it's worth going back. If you look at this middle image here, that's what Instagram looked like in early 2016. And then we launched a redesign that sort of stripped away, which you can see on the far right, a bunch of the color. We took color out of the horizontal nav bar, we took color out of the header, and the thesis there was, if we're all about visuals, why are we getting in the way of the platform's, sort of the media that people are trying to post? And so the idea was to strip away as much color as possible, to keep things very simple, and to let the media speak. And so we wanted to make sure even the call to action button here was colored and dynamically colored, so as it's not something the advertiser has to provide, but we sort of take the dominant color from the media. We have kind of a way to make sure that that's within the bounds. And then even with carousel media, as you're scrolling across, you might see that now in Instagram, that bar actually matches the color of the asset. So it's still important to continue iterating. This is the change on color happened earlier this year. We rolled out more broadly, and we continue to think about that from a feed perspective. I think the last really interesting lesson on how we think about scaling the business is you also can't expect advertisers to just go where you want them to go. Meaning, when we first launched the business, we launched in a bunch of the sort of powerful editing tools and interface tools that we have at Facebook Inc. So APIs and Power Editor and Ads Manager, if you're familiar with those tools. But we were actually not servicing a huge chunk of Instagram native small businesses who really were only using Instagram as a platform, and they weren't kind of looking at Facebook Suite more broadly. And so we've rolled out small business tools for two main reasons. One, to help businesses establish a presence on the platform. But the second, to make it really easy for them as they were thinking about growing their business to run advertising directly and natively inside the platform, which is what some of these lightweight tools let them do. So it's also important to make sure where you meet businesses where they are, in the same way that we couldn't just ignore the fact that businesses and advertisers are trying to drive conversions and clicks, and we had to support those objectives. You have to also make sure you are where they are. The thing that's really interesting, I think, about this work is certainly it allowed us to build that funnel of advertising, but it also taught us something else, which is people come to Instagram to connect with their friends and family, but also to connect with their interests, as I mentioned at the beginning. And businesses are a key component, a key type of interest on the platform. And so people's mindset comes in with the expectation that they can be inspired, can discover new products, which is a really important thing that we had intuition around, but until we could actually define that this set of accounts were businesses, it was hard for us to understand what activity we were seeing and what behaviors we wanted to think about as we were building new products. So in the next section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the things we learned about what people were doing and how that's helped inspire the types of business products that we're building. So this is all about taking the consumer behavior we were seeing, sort of the way people were hacking the platform, and removing some of that friction to figure out what to go build next. Now, stories is a really good example that is not quite business related, but certainly is applicable. So how many people here have been on Instagram since 2010, 2011? Super early. If you go back in your feed, if you haven't removed some of the old photos, and you look back at the stuff you used to post, I guarantee it was quote unquote lower quality, you posted more often, and there was a different aesthetic probably to that content than the stuff maybe you've posted more recently. So why is that? Well, there's a couple reasons. One is as social platforms, especially kind of sharing platforms, evolve and grow, your audience as a consumer, or sorry, as a producer of content, your audience is continuing to grow because the platform is growing. So the amount of people who see your media increases. At the same time, as professional content creators, whether they're businesses or celebrities or content media creators come on the platform, the type of content they create is just at a higher quality. They spent more time doing it. So by definition, the things that you see are of higher quality, which means the expectations of what you think you need to produce are higher. So you kind of have these two opposing forces to content production, which is more people are going to see your stuff, and the quality of the content you see is higher. So from a pure mimicry perspective, the things that you see that set the norms of what you should post have changed. Now, the third thing that's happened is, and maybe you guys can reflect this in your own experience, the way sharing in social platforms has also evolved. Whereas things have gone more mobile, more things have moved to messaging and to private groups. And so a lot of the kind of broadcast use cases of when you would post a piece of media out to the world on a kind of a permanent basis was evolving. So you have these three things that were kind of going against, from our perspective, what it was that people were posting to feed. So what could we do? One thing is we could change feed. We could make feed feel like we could lower the pressure. So we experimented with things like not letting media stick on your profile, or letting media automatically expire after a period of time. But what we were doing really was changing the job that people were hiring feed for. So we use this framework, this jobs framework a lot, which is how are people using our product, what expectations do they have, and really what they were using feed for was a highlights product. It was the best moments in their life. And now we were trying to change it and modify it in a way that didn't quite fit that job. So that is really the genesis of why Stories was born, which is if the idea is to share the moments in between those highlights, you had to change more than just a few simple rules. You had to change the entire kind of physics around the sharing model, which is it had to be kind of sequential because you shared multiple moments throughout the day, and maybe those moments together make up a more meaningful thing than any one piece of media by itself. It had to be kind of very mobile native and be really native to video, which is why vertical video is such an important part of Stories. It had to be author-centric as opposed to media-centric. So if you think about Stories today, you tap into the author and you consume, as opposed to the media kind of being pushed individually to you. So all of these individual kind of components of what is the Stories product is why it works. And it's grown tremendously quickly. We launched it in August of 2016. Some of the milestones, we reached 200 million within the first couple of months just because of how quickly this was a latent need that people had on the platform, but they were hacking feed to make it work. And so this really satisfied visual sharing, status updates, but in a much lower pressure way. And now we've got over 400 million people using it every single day. And we continue to think about the jobs that people are hiring us for. So I'll give you one anecdote there, which is if you think about sharing things during your day, I think a lot of us are out and about, we're traveling, we're working, and the things that we are sharing are things that we come across. So we tend to use the camera in that way. But a lot of what we were seeing people share were sort of, screenshots of something dark, and then they were sort of using the text tool to put some thoughts on there, which really was showing to us that they weren't using the platform to communicate the things that they were doing, but the things they were thinking. And they were using the platform as a way to connect and communicate, not just as a way to broadcast media. And so that's why we launched the type tool, was to say, this is how people were hacking the platform. They were using the camera and taking a dark background photo. But what they were really trying to do was just share some text. And so the type tool, which we launched earlier this year, has, I think, been pretty successful because it's really been thinking about this use case and how we can best serve it. And I think the polling sticker is another example of that. The question sticker, for any of you that are using it, I think is another example of that. It's really about thinking of how are people hiring the product, and how are we not really servicing that very well and getting in their way, and how do we remove a bunch of that friction. And the cool thing is we see a really bunch of interesting use cases. Let's see if the sound works in this one, probably not. So this was a really cool idea from Bacardi when we first launched, which is, okay, if the idea is that you can navigate between stories using your thumbs, how do you actually turn that into something fun and playful? So what they did was they launched a story really early on where you could be a DJ and use the turntables and navigate forward or navigate back, and there was sound associated to it. We couldn't have possibly come up with this use case and built a product for this. So it's not saying we have to solve for every need. Sometimes you do have to just get out of the way, and you get to see some really cool examples of what brands and others are doing when you just build the tools and you get out of the way. Okay, so what are some of the other things that we're learning that are informing the things that we're building? So I mentioned that we've got businesses that are now on the platform, 25 million of them. And what we were seeing from people was that they were reaching those business platforms. 200 million consumers visit a business profile every single day. So they're visiting the profiles to learn more about the business, but then we weren't really giving them an easy way to go and do the thing that they wanted to go do next. Like, how do you, when you come across a restaurant, actually make a reservation and go there? How do you, when you come across a ticket, an event venue, and you want to book a reservation, how do you do that? So we're experimenting with how do we think about the next place to take people to actually do business once they land on a business profile. So we've got some partnerships with OpenTable and Resi and a few others that we're thinking through what verticals make sense from an integration perspective, but also how do we take this latent need of people getting to a business profile. 25 million business profiles, as I mentioned. I think a really interesting stat is more than half of them don't list a website. So Instagram is their digital presence. And so if that is the case, how do we make sure we let them take that next step? Another thing is around messaging. So Instagram Direct is the messaging platform. I think our public stat there is we have 375 million people using Instagram Direct every month. And that's actually the 5th largest messaging platform in the world. But it's built into Instagram. And why? It's because content and conversations are actually being inspired by that visual inspiration I mentioned earlier. So today, without really building anything specific, 150 million consumers are having conversations with businesses every single month. And what are they talking about? They're talking about the content they saw. They're talking about kind of availability, especially for small businesses. And this really has become a place where business is being done. And now we're starting to think about the ways and tools by which we can make it easier for businesses, specifically ones that are managing all of this work on their mobile devices, filters for the inbox, the ability to set up quick replies, and the ability to just manage this presence better. Now we're also thinking about not just the small businesses using the mobile app, but also the larger businesses who maybe have more volume and how we can make it easier for them to communicate as well. But again, all starting from that consumer need, that consumer use case, and removing friction along the way. And the last one on that I think is really interesting is we launched Save before we launched our shopping product, which I think was an important step for us, where a lot of people were screenshotting things in Feed. Over 20% of people every day, actually, were screenshotting things in Feed. And now they maybe were doing it for a bunch of different reasons, but one of the use cases that was pretty predominant in the research was they're just saving it to keep it for later. Now, the use cases about why they were saving to keep it for later certainly varied. Sometimes it was just to save it for personal kind of use. Sometimes they want to remember something to come back to it. Maybe it was a piece of inspiration. Maybe it was a product. And so we started looking at the types of things people were saving, and a lot of it was business content, was product content. And so we introduced Save as a way to kind of really easily save a piece of media that you come across in Feed, and then be able to come across or come back to it later when it makes sense. It was actually a really important thing for shopping because of the sort of native behavior we saw there, which was, and I apologize for the resolution here, but if you think about shopping in 2016, it was happening on the platform, but it was absolutely being hacked. Where you had brands, this is Nordstrom, listing a URL in their bio, and then people were asking questions like, how do I find this product? What's the item number? How do I get to it? So literally there are comments that say, go to the website and type item 45678, and this is how you find it. Like, incredibly inefficient. And there were platforms that were trying to solve this need, but if you think about this in 2016, the number of clicks required to go from this moment of inspiration to a place where you can actually learn more about that product, this, I won't even let this thing play, it's gonna take so long, but it's multiple hops to get there. So you've basically lost that moment of inspiration. At the same time, the reason we think Save is really important is that shopping is not a linear journey. It's not that you discover something and then you consider it and then you have intent and then you buy it. Like, it doesn't work like that. It is very much, we call it the noodle, where you're kind of moving between the stages, then you're moving back, and then you're moving forward. And so you can't have an impulse purchase kind of in your feed right away, which is why we never launched a buy button in Feed. It's why if you look at the shopping product we have in market now, you come across a piece of inspiration, you then can tap on it to see what those products are, and you get information about those products. You can tap into them to see more information, and that's when you have the ability to go a level deeper to actually purchase something. And the idea was we don't want to be in your face about the commerciality of the specific post, but if you have intent to shop, then we absolutely should be able to let you do that. But if you want to save it and come back to it later, we should be able to let you do that too. Now we're thinking about that same use case in stories, where if in feed the most native thing was to have a tag in the same way that people tags showed up, what is the most native thing in stories for products? And that's stickers, because that's how people communicate in stories. And so we're experimenting with product stickers and the same exact idea, but they operate very much from a discovery and inspiration first, and then if you want to opt in to learn more about that product, you certainly can. So this was just a small taste of some of the things and how we build them and how we work on them. I wanted to make sure that we save time for questions, and so I'd like to open it up.
All right, thanks, Vishal. So we'll have two mics. Ginger, you want to take that side? And we'll try and alternate. Try and keep your questions short and not to ask follow-on questions, just to give everyone else a chance. So we'll start, all right, we'll start here, and we'll keep alternating.
My name is Venkat Srinivasan from Zyneman Inc. One question is, when you iterate on the features, how much of A/B testing or any multivariate testing you guys did? And also, how much of the businesses were allowed to test?
Yeah, good question. So everything that we launch is tested. Obviously, the kind of permutations of the number of combination of things you could test kind of vary, and as is expected in any kind of A/B testing environment, you've got holdouts on things that you can kind of compare over a longer period of time. But I think there's two things. There's the things that we want to learn, which is what we will test, and then there are things that are tests to kind of help form a strategy, and we tend to not do the latter, which is, I think, one of the ways in which we build product, which is a little bit different, I think, than some others, is we do spend the time up front to decide, is this an area that we want to go and explore and kind of commit to? And if we did build feature X or product X, what would Instagram look like a couple years out? And can we maintain the simplicity principles, the ability to keep the design systems kind of intact? And if we can't do that, then we actually make some of those calls up front. We don't kind of test our way there. So while we do a bunch of testing on areas and making sure that our hypotheses are correct, we won't test just to learn. And I think that's a pretty interesting kind of difference in sort of how we build product. Now, there are some things that are new products that if we are deciding we want to go forward, but do they actually have fit for businesses, then we will invite businesses into a beta. We've got a great sales team that has these relationships that we can do that with. So there's user-facing things and business-facing things, but I think an important takeaway is there's different ways to think about testing. We tend to think of it more very iteratively and less of, let's try a bunch of things and then figure out where to go next.
So I'm actually interested in that save feature. How do you do attribution then? As in, how do you decide that the users actually, because of that save action, they end up purchasing the product, not because they saw another ads on, say, Google search or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of a classic kind of last touch versus multi-touch kind of question. So we'd apply very, oh, sure, sorry, separate mic. So question was, given save, how do we do attribution against that, given there could be multiple touch points between the save item and any kind of further purchase? So the idea is that we use save very much as kind of a signal towards intent, and we wouldn't necessarily apply all of the kind of credit for the conversion to that save. In the same way that's, in some ways, if you think about more of an earned impression than it is an actual paid impression. But it is more of a kind of a signal of the value and the intent of the user as opposed to that individual kind of piece of media. But the same point on last touch versus multi-touch we deal with, and we get the benefit of sitting on top of Facebook infrastructure. So from an ads perspective, all the measurement, all the optimization that we can do across the properties can also apply to Instagram.
Quick question. So I love the feature of being able to hover over a photo and then it automatically links to the option to buy. And I understand that this is available for active advertisers and business. But in today's economy, we see a lot of independent entrepreneurs whose personal accounts are directly linked to their business. So I'm thinking about personal trainers. I'm thinking about the individual. If I take a picture of myself in a jacket, can I hover over that as an individual to show it listed, say, on my eBay selling account, right? So is there any thought of how to integrate that for personal use, just because everything is so embedded between personal and business nowadays?
Yeah, so the question is, would we ever think about product tags for individuals and kind of bringing some of the democracy to the tagging kind of feature? So the short answer is, like, we're not planning to do that, and there's a couple of reasons. One is, I think there's a couple of different, again, jobs to be done for around shopping discovery. One is around, I see a piece of content and I want that specific product. And the other is I come across something and I love the look, I love the idea of that, I want something similar to that. So we're focused very much on the former, which in our opinion, we need sort of the catalogs and the actual SKUs from the businesses and the brands that are creating that content. And we want to make sure we're building infrastructure and kind of the tagging ability around that. So that's why we started with brands, and we will continue to work with businesses directly to kind of get that in place. Now, not to say there isn't a really robust ecosystem around that, but it's not something we're explicitly planning to build support for in the feature that you saw. Now, I think social commerce generally is super interesting, not in the ways it's always, I think, been thought of as, oh, just because my friends are on the platform, I'll discover something new. But so much of shopping is social, and it's social because maybe you don't trust all your friends as tastemakers, but maybe you do trust a few, but you do trust them as validation. My wife actually has this direct thread with her sister and her best friend, and when she finds things on Instagram, she'll share stuff into that thread, and they'll ask each other questions about whether they should buy it, as if they had gone to the mall together. So they're having a social experience around products and around commerce. They're doing it asynchronously, and they're doing it from different parts of the world. And so that's, I think, a really interesting behavior that we're excited to explore more. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing the decisions behind the aspect ratio of the media in the feed. Can you talk a little bit about how do you guys decide to use the portrait format for Instagram TV? Because most of the YouTubers are shooting their videos horizontally. I'm just curious, how did you decide that?
Yeah, so question is, why did we decide to go with vertical for IGTV as opposed to horizontal, which is where a lot of the content has been shot? So I think there's a couple of reasons. One is we think vertical video is the most native video for a phone. It's where a majority of people, is how they hold their phone. Even when they're watching horizontal content, they tend to hold it vertically, and it just gets letterboxed. So that's one. I think the second is, I think we are interested in sort of the new content ecosystem around vertical, which I think will be different than horizontal. And it's very early. We're in the first couple of months of the product. But some of the early learnings that we're starting to see is, if landscape content was really about the world, vertical content is really about the person and the personality. So what is the type of content that features people? If you think about shots that are horizontal, when they zoom in to feature a person, they tend to crop out the sides, but you don't get the full person. So what are the things that are around personalities and around people that might be more interesting potentially in vertical, and how does that play into the strategy around content creators and these digital native stars who are really born on the platform and have created content for the platform? And so we're excited to kind of figure out what they figure out, and we think the content is just more native to the mobile device. So we'll see. It's early. We'll figure it out. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you decide product goals? Do you operate on a yearly, annual basis? How do you review these product goals once you've decided them? Like, what's the frequency? Is it like a quarterly basis? Can you give a few examples, like as a leader of product within your organization, how do you measure product managers' performance?
Yeah, so the question was, how do we sort of think about team structure and goals and frequency and cadence and whatnot? So we run on a semi-annual cadence, so we plan twice a year. We break that up. Some teams break it up kind of into quarters, some into 2-month kind of sprints inside of the half. And actually, the cool thing about being at Instagram and at Facebook is actually individual teams can run whatever process they actually want. So we sort of try to centralize planning, but the actual development and execution is pretty dynamic. Some teams will run every week and push codes, some will run every 2, every 4. And because we're continuously pushing builds out to the server and we're kind of pushing out to the app stores every month, or every week rather, there's always an ability to kind of get into the next one. So okay, how do you run an organization at scale with those kind of guardrails in place? So there's 2 things. One is we make sure that the strategies and the guardrails are clear. Here's what winning looks like for a given product area. Here's how we know we're going to win. Here's what metrics we might look at for success. And within those guardrails, we then give those to the teams and say, now this is your place to play. And so strategy is very much tops down for the most part, and innovation is very much bottoms up. So the idea is to give his teams as much autonomy as possible. And of course, it recurses down. So my broadest teams will have the biggest possible goals and boundaries, and then it'll recurse down. But the idea is that individual engineers and PMs and designers are not checking in all the things that they're doing with the leadership chain. That's too slow. And so kind of setting in those right boundaries and giving teams the right kind of goals to check progress against is how we scale decision making.
Hi, so I had a question about just in general, as Instagram utilizes curated pages to deliver core products to its users, how do you kind of trade off usability with getting personalized ads and data privacy? especially since we noticed issues coming up with GDPR and data collection through Facebook. Is Instagram anonymizing any of the data that it's taking from its users, or is it selling any of the PII that's being collected to advertisers?
Yeah, so I think the short answer to your question is no on the sort of the data sales and PII points. One of the benefits of actually sitting on Facebook infrastructure is as we're rolling out these changes across the board, they apply to Facebook and to Instagram. So transparency controls, kind of ad archives, all the things that we've been talking about for the last year also apply to Instagram, not just to Facebook. So as a user, kind of full transparency into kind of what targeting constraints they have, the ability to opt out of some of those categories, the ability to report individual ads and say this isn't relevant to me is also super important. And then we follow all the kind of the guidelines, both that are regional from like a GDPR perspective, but also just things that we value around making sure that it's very clear why you were served something, and if you want to opt out of it, you certainly can. At the same time, I think platforms like ours, I think people understand that there is a value exchange, that the platform is free, and advertising is how we support it. So we want to make the ads as good as we possibly can make them. That's only in the benefit of the users, the advertisers, and us, but it is kind of how the business runs.
Okay, so looks like you have some AI-powered features. For example, choosing the dominant color and identifying and tagging all the commercial elements in the media. So I want to know how you're measuring the accuracy of the AI models, if you have set any benchmark, and how are you handling the cases where the AI has wrongly tagged an object which is not like a commercial object, and sort of, whether you're also letting the user give a feedback and maybe relearning, from whatever they are tagging. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so I think there's two broad points there. One is we tend to use AI, kind of ML and all the other techniques in the places where it makes sense, ranking, optimization, some of the stuff that you mentioned. And there are other cases where we will lean into more manual work. So for example, the product tags are not AI. They're a business kind of tagging the individual products, specifically where on the image they appear, what product they are in their catalog. And so we find that right balance of, yeah, certainly there are things that we could probably do at higher scale, but maybe lower precision or lower recall, but we want to make sure that we're opinionated on where the product should actually fit there. So we tend to use AI more on some of the ranking work, some optimization work, certainly on making sure that good content kind of goes on the platform and bad content stays off the platform. There's a lot of really great work happening from a content classification perspective. And again, one of the benefits of Instagram kind of sitting on top of Facebook infrastructure is not only do we get to leverage the work that we do, but also the work that's happening across kind of all of Facebook, and we get to plug into those pieces of infrastructure, whether that's machine learning infrastructure, content classification infrastructure, or ads like we talked about.
Hi.
Where am I looking?
To start with, I'd like to thank you for the informative presentation. And my question was regarding Instagram TV. So do you think it is a direct competitor to YouTube? And if so, what is going to be your USP against YouTube?
I think that video is a general trend. I think as content has gotten more sophisticated in terms of both like the bandwidth available to you, sort of the power of the camera, the power of sort of the phones in our devices in our pockets, it is more of an immersive way of communicating than certainly pictures, certainly text before that. I think video is also very early in sort of what does it actually mean on mobile at scale, and I think there is no winner take all in the video market. And so I think one of the reasons the question here was around vertical versus horizontal is we've taken a different approach, which is to say what is a more native kind of mobile video experience, which is vertical, and not just kind of, we don't expect the content creation to be kind of from the media kind of ecosystem that exists today necessarily, but really the media ecosystem of tomorrow, which is these digital content creators who have built their following on Instagram, but then really don't have a way to take their engagement deeper on the platform. They're kind of forced to go somewhere else. So that's kind of the two-sided strategy here, which is say it's video, but video is massive. Vertical is certainly different, and this content creator ecosystem is very unique to Instagram. So that's what we kind of put together in what is IGTV. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing this great idea about hiring for jobs. I really appreciate that. As you look at the things you shared with us today, what was, in your opinion, the most impactful idea for monetizing? Which one had the most push to drive monetization of the platform?
Just to, to clarify your question, the biggest push from our perspective or from the kind of advertising user?
I wasn't able to answer follow that. I would like both sides, but
Okay.
you know, if I was going to pick one, it would be for people in the field of advertising.
Yeah. So the question is, what was sort of the biggest push to help monetize from an advertiser perspective? I think the biggest one was around some of the format flexibility. I should put it in two camps. I put format flexibility and kind of advertiser objective flexibility as two things that this is how the advertising ecosystem works. You know, before Instagram, I was at a company called Turn, kind of programmatic advertising, founding engineer there in 2005, was there for over 10 years. And the one thing that I learned was that while you could, on the margins, get advertisers to do new things, you had to prove value to actually get it to scale. And so, and we were building these ad products, the only way we could build a long-term business is if we were delivering ROI. And delivering ROI on a new product with an objective that advertisers don't necessarily know how to value gets you a bunch of great test budgets, doesn't necessarily get you scale. And so I think the biggest learning was, yes, we're Instagram, yes, we can do something different, but being different for different sake may not be the right approach when it comes to building ads. Let's make sure they feel good on the platform, they feel relevant, they feel native, but let's make sure we're delivering ROI to advertisers.
So ad revenue seems to be the main source and focus for revenue generation. Does Instagram feel the need to diversify its revenue sources?
Do we feel the need to diversify our revenue sources? I actually think ads is a phenomenal business for us for a couple of reasons. One, I think it just sort of naturally lends itself to the type of platform ecosystem environment we have. The other is it's a really great kind of growth engine, not just for us, but for our business ecosystem. And so if you think about those 25 million small businesses that I mentioned, how do they discover new audiences? How do they discover new customers? And how do we use the mission of connecting people to the things they love, and how does the business model support the mission support the business model? They're very well aligned. And so from that perspective, both the business is itself, you know, good, but it's also very aligned in sort of what we're looking to achieve. So no plans to change the business model. Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about the IG shopping app that was recently in the news? Is it going to be a separate app or is it going to be inside? And secondly, there is a big startup ecosystem or small company ecosystem around Instagram. So could you tell your opinions of how you think about that? Do you internalize some of the ideas that you see, or do you work with them? What's been your approach?
So I can't comment on any kind of rumors or speculation in the news, but I can talk a little bit about, well, you know, the press is the press. I can talk a little bit about sort of how we think about shopping, which will, I think I answered a little bit of sort of from a product perspective, but going back to the point about jobs, and I certainly can't take credit for jobs theory. Clayton Christensen wrote a great book on this. But I think it's really applicable, which is like, what are the different kinds of jobs that shopping solves for people? So I think there are, you know, a few different ways you can categorize them. One of the ways we think about it is there's very much a kind of a utility-based job around shopping, which is I have a list of things that I need to get done, and maybe I know exactly the product that I'm looking for, but I'm looking for the best price. There's a way to go and do that. There is sort of the serendipitous, I discovered a product, but I was actually doing something else, which is kind of a lot of how Instagram works today, which is you're scrolling through the feed, scrolling through stories, and you discover and stumble upon something. How do you go deeper? And then there's the actual shopping as entertainment, shopping as a hobby. And where do you go to do that? And if a lot of that in the physical world has been in malls and in places where people go to shop, what does that experience look like on mobile and digital? And there are a bunch of different ways that that could manifest, and we're thinking about how that job of shopping as a hobby, shopping as entertainment could be possible on Instagram. Now, on your second question, which theoretically wasn't in the rules, but I will answer it anyway, was the ecosystem. And I think the ecosystem is incredibly valuable. Like, we can't possibly build everything that our advertising partners need, that our ecosystem needs. And so that's why we have both the Facebook Marketing Partner Program from an ecosystem perspective. We have our developer platform where people can execute on top of the stack. At the same time, I think we have reined some things back. And so in 2010, or 2011, when we first launched the platform, the idea was, hey, we had only an iOS app. It was fairly limited feature set wise. And so the best way to get some of that innovation was to kind of open up the platform and say, let people kind of build what they want. And as the platform has evolved, we've sort of narrowed those use cases and say, what are the ones that we are really excited about, which is to help businesses scale and to do the things that they can't quite do with a mobile native only platform. And so that's where a lot of the API work has gone, which is to unlock a lot of those business use cases, but some of those broader use cases we think are either better served by the platform directly or are kind of serving us at a disservice where if we launch something new, we can't make sure that the entire ecosystem that's leveraging Instagram is able to use those things. So as opposed to kind of doing that in a way that was, remove the platform slowly over time, we made a pretty big kind of commitment in 2017 saying we were going to sunset the legacy API, introduce these new ones, which we've been introducing over time. And that's kind of how we think about kind of use case driven platform ecosystems as opposed to just completely kind of wide open. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Charlene, and I am an eBay intern this summer, and I go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I'm an avid Instagram user. I love Instagram. A feature on Instagram stories that just kind of came out was the Ask Me Anything kind of feature. That's awesome, but sometimes people don't get any questions because they may not be that popular or whatever. So that's what I see within my friend group. So there's this new thing that people are doing. They're making these templates, like About Me templates, and they're screenshotting them and putting them on their stories. So I wonder if Instagram has seen those templates yet, and wonder if they would see any opportunities in making their own templates for people to fill out. It could be another feature that makes Instagram stand out from any other, like Snapchat or something like that.
I think the templates example is one where I think the community, and the question was really about these sort of templates that people are posting on Instagram and would we ever build our own. I think there's like this interesting fine line between how do we build something that's pretty generic that can accomplish a bunch of different use cases, which is like the question sticker, and ones that would solve a very specific purpose but may not be applicable to as many use cases. So I think the goal for things like templates is, I think it's great that the ecosystem is doing that. In the same way, early with stories, we had people that were playing a game called the numbers game, where you would share a number with a friend sort of personally, and then they would share a story referencing you, but only with your number. So you knew that they were talking about you, but no one else knew that they were talking about you. We didn't have to build that. That was something that the platform just supported. So we think there's a bunch of really great use cases like that, templates being a really good example of that, where I think the creativity of the community is far bigger than what we could ever do. But we kind of want to put the right guardrails in place to make sure we can structure some of it, but the rest we kind of let the community decide.
Thank you.
I think we have a last question right
Hi. Hopefully it's a good one because I'm the last one. But my name's Akena Anena, and I'm just curious about the fact you said that about half of the small businesses on Instagram don't have websites. And right now a lot of business does happen and a lot of payment transactions do happen on Instagram. And I think usually people are driving to PayPal or now they're just posting their Cash Apps. So I was just curious on, does Instagram have plans to integrate payments in the future?
So we've been testing some payment work, and this is public. I think some of the actions that I mentioned earlier around booking reservations and booking tables, we have some integrations with ticket providers and where you can book a place that requires credit card information. I think the reason, well, two things. One is I completely agree with you that there's a bunch of this kind of work happening natively in terms of people and businesses doing business and exchanging payments. But to my earlier point on if we're investing in something, I want to think about not just how that one feature would work, but how would it look across all of Instagram, and how would it evolve, and how would it fit into the platform? So it's one of the reasons why we're taking our time with things like that is, what does that look like, not just for the use cases we know, but some of the broader use cases that could come? How does it integrate with things like shopping? How does it integrate with messaging? How does it integrate with some of these other things that we're thinking about? And again, we have this great kind of infrastructure at Facebook where we can tap into the tech, but it really is about making sure it fits into the ecosystem, fits into Instagram, the system, and then we can kind of scale it from there. Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Can we get a round of applause, Vishal? Thank you.